The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a session on dealing with conflict. If I could have one of you or a couple of you just type into the question box that you can hear me, just to make sure the audio is coming through on your end and we are all in the same conversation. Thank you very much. Today we want to look at dealing with conflict. This session will be recorded, so if you want to replay at a given point in time, you will receive notification once the recording has been processed and available. This is an interactive session, meaning as we go through this session, if there are questions that come up for you at the end, that will be your opportunity to pose any questions that you would like to me. And we're going to have a couple interactive pieces just to poll the group to understand where you are as participants in dealing with conflict and some other issues. Okay? Your questions are encouraged, and I will handle them as we get to the end of the conversation. To those of you who are participating for the first time, MeasureX has been working with utility companies on helping them improve both those service interactions and sales interactions they are having with those customers. And as support to that, we look to do a lot of leadership and coach training to make sure that if training is in place, that there is a support system to reinforce it. And we've been at this for about 17 years, and we've worked with a number of utilities from across the United States in a variety of different roles in helping them on improving performance. The objectives of the session are simple. We want to look at how to de-escalate those emotional customer situations. You as organizations, a good part of what happens in your day-to-day world is a customer calling in because they are not happy about something or they need some kind of service, along with naturally looking to buy your services. One of the key parts we're going to look at that's going to be really important as we go through this is how to create appropriate control when you're dealing with emotional customers. And one of the things that I see for many of the organizations I interact with, I do a lot of coaching with those customer service or sales groups. So one of the things that I see as an opportunity that can help in reducing that conflict that your company is having with interactions is sometimes that documentation on conversations. And I am guessing that no matter where you are in the country, you have some customers that are not exactly what we'll call warm and friendly to work with. Sometimes they're actually just downright ornery. So how do you deal with them when they go past the point of just being angry or upset to really getting into confrontation at a higher level? So first poll, here's the question for you in that first poll. Let's see if I can get it to come up. I'm having a little challenge this morning with technology. Have you been frustrated, upset, or raised your voice to an employee at a business because of poor service in the last 90 days? If you would be so kind as to give me a yes or no based on your personal experience. Give you another couple seconds here. So the poll says that 31% of you have and 69% of you haven't. That's a good thing. But for that 37% of you, 31% of you that have, the question is, why do customers become emotional? Why did you become upset, frustrated, angry with a business or an individual in a business? And for most of those interactions, it was because you as a customer, you had an expectation. And that expectation of what you wanted to have happen in that service interaction didn't, or there was something missing, a piece of that. So that's when customers become upset. They, for one of two reasons. In many cases, you have two. I look at it as two customer groups. You have one customer group that has what we'll call some kind of service issue, complaint, or something that isn't working, and then the other group of customers is those that are your delinquents, your non-pays, that have a little struggle meeting their monthly interactions. Both of those become emotional when, as they see it, expectations are met. Now, are those customers always rational? And the answer we know is they are not. And that is the issue, and that is one of the most difficult situations you as a company deal with, because each customer that calls in with that emotional issue, whatever that situation is for them, that rationality isn't there for them. They have now gone into what we call emotion. So the challenge is how to shift them out of some of that emotion right now that is really governing everything that's happening in their interaction with you, and back into more rational thinking. So, second poll in that interaction, and here's the question. Question is, have you provided training on working with emotional customer situations in the last 12 months? Please answer the poll. Let's see where you are. Okay, so the poll results say that 68% of you have not, but 32% of you have. Those of you that have done that, that's great. Now, key part is this. Your team is dealing with emotional customers. Those customers have expectations. And if their expectations as they see it are not met, they have a tendency to become a little upset. The challenge is if the customer angers you, they are in essence in control. And from all of the calls that I listen to from companies across the United States, one of the key things that escalates a customer interaction, no matter what kind of customer inquiry it is, with those that are taking place on the phone, is voice. If a customer's upset and that individual, what happens is normally when the customer raises their voice, the individual on the other end of the phone has a tendency to raise theirs. And when that happens, the fight is on in those conversations. So voice tone is critical in that. But the other part that happens is what is called that fight or flight mechanism. Within all of us as humans, we have what is known as the reptilian brain. Within that brain of ours is that fight or flight mechanism. When we are feeling stressed, pressured, our tendency is to want to do one or the other. And normally when that blood pressure increases, adrenaline starts to flow, we enter fight mentality. Our voice tone changes. We get more defensive. One of the things that can help you in diffusing some of that emotion is using the customer's name appropriately in the conversation. You're trying to take them out of that they are just an account number, that they are someone on the other end of that phone. Using their name as you ask questions brings them more in line that they are important, that they are somebody. Used appropriately can help diffuse that. And this one we will talk about as we go a little bit further, and that is the questions that you ask in an interaction. The key part is this. We're trying to get someone out of emotion into more logic and reasoning, and the questions that we introduce will be important in that. And last, and one of my favorites, is interrupt. When we get into a defensive mode, whether it's with our friends, a family, coworkers, spouse, or those customers, what happens is we enter defense, blood pressure increases, adrenaline starts to rise, and as that individual is telling us their story, we are not, in essence, always listening because we are now entering defensive posture. When that happens, we start interrupting. And from my standpoint, it is what I listen to in a lot of conversations where it starts to go downhill fairly quickly in those interactions. So we talked about voice inflection. So those of you who have been in training, and there's a lot of you on the call, here's the question. Let's see what you remember. When we are on the phone in communication with an individual, what percentage of our communication is the words that we are actually using, and what percent is the voice? In those interactions, the vast majority is voice inflection. That's why it is so critical to maintain it. It's difficult to do because we get engaged, but the more that we can keep the voice tone, that helps to diffuse what could be an escalating situation. Does every customer have a story? And the answer is they do. Every time they pick up the phone and call in to you, they have a situation, a problem, a want, a need, a something. Now, the question is all those conversations that your company has every day with all of those customers that are calling you for whatever they're calling you with, you as a company have heard those stories countless times before. And the challenge is sometimes when the customer is telling that story, whatever that problem or issue is, the individual that's in part of that other side of that conversation is not really engaged in listening to understand their need, their want, or their problem. And naturally, if they have told you something in that story and now you're asking them for that same information again, it now creates that start of escalation because it communicates to them you weren't listening. Important things. Words mean different things to different people. We all have our perception, and what happens where some conversations start to escalate is because we assume things that we think that customer meant or said. Use confirming statements. Let me make sure I understand what you said. Let me clarify that. Summarize what might have been the story they told, just to make sure that from what they described that you have a real clear understanding before you work to create a solution or take a next step in that interaction. One of my favorites and one of the common situations, and that is trigger words. What happens when we as individuals on the phone dealing with emotional customers, when that situation starts to escalate and we are not always thinking as rationally because emotion for us is entered in, we sometimes use words and phrases that may have a tendency to escalate the situation in those conversations. You have certain policies and procedures in place for a variety of things. And when we say it's not our policy, that doesn't help the customer. Help them understand the why certain things exist as to why a certain procedure was taking place in that conversation, or certain things had to be done a certain way versus that's the way we do it. That's our policy. So let's look at those emotional customer situations. We talked about questions just a couple minutes ago. There are two types of questions that are going to be important in helping diffuse emotional customer situations. One of those questions are what are called open-ended questions. Open-ended questions, you are just trying to understand the customer's point of view. The objective, very simply, is this. If we are going to solve a problem, understand a customer situation, we need to get the customer talking and us listening to that situation. If you're starting a question with one of the words that you see down there, that starting with one of those words creates the beginning of a sentence that the person can't answer yes or no to. They're going to have to provide more information, which leads to the important thing. I mentioned questions. When we are upset, frustrated, we are in what's called right brain activity, that emotional part of our brain where emotions and some of those other creative parts of us come from in day-to-day thought and working interactions. And that's also where all the emotions come from. When we can shift the customer from right brain function to left brain function, we now move them out of emotion into logic and reasoning. Using open-ended questions are going to help you do that, because if we've asked a question that they can't simply answer yes or no to, it's going to help shift from emotion to logic, because in order to answer those questions, if we are asking appropriate questions, they are going to have to move to left brain to create those answers. And that is the objective. How do we shift the emotion? How do we diffuse that emotion? A powerful open-ended question that will work in many interactions, not all, so hear me on this, but in many interactions is, what can we do to make this right for you? Now, naturally it doesn't work in non-pays or delinquents or certain interactions. But if we've inconvenienced the customer from something we've done, something that wasn't handled appropriately, it is one of the simplest things. Because now we can understand what's going to satisfy the customer. And naturally, is the individual that is having that conversation, do they have the empowerment to make that decision and offer that customer whatever? Maybe it's a little compensation, maybe it's change in schedule. For what didn't happen, what can we do to resolve that issue? And I want you to think about, in your interactions as a customer, if you have not had a good experience in a business, think about even the last 2 or 3 years where you weren't treated appropriately. When was the last time a business asked you, what can we do to make this right? It does not happen in most service interactions with any corporation. And last, as research has simply shown that in most cases, in asking the customer what they can do, what you can do to resolve the issue for them, it will be sometimes far less than what you would have offered. Because in many cases, from their side, as they see it, a simple or small change, a simple apology, just a little maybe change in the schedule, or providing just a follow-up to something would have rectified it and cost you less money. Our challenge is, unless we ask the customer, we are making an assumption again. Closed-ended questions are the other side of that interaction. Closed-ended questions, there again, we're looking to take control. We are looking to simply, in this case, get yes or no answers. Goal being is for us to be in control of the conversation to help diffuse the emotion. Now, voice inflection becomes critical as we're asking these questions, because we're looking to come from a place of trying to resolve or understand a problem or situation. Now, naturally, a lot of the customer interactions you have are working with those people that, for whatever reason, have a struggle paying you monthly in some form or fashion. And that, naturally, for any organization, is a bigger part of your phone calls when you're dealing with unhappy, difficult, emotional, or frustrated customers. Important question I have for you is, does the company have clearly defined standards on when to offer an extension or when to disconnect? Meaning, does every representative know, by being able, if you have software that can evaluate credit or previous payment history, what are the key things to look for to determine if we can be flexible to this particular customer, or based on their past history that we have to take a harder line. And the reason being is those people that are what I'll call your professionals, they have a tendency to just call one representative, and if they don't get the answer they want, they will try another representative. And so naturally in that disconnect, that is the toughest issue you face. So do we clearly understand what everybody understand what those standards are in those interactions and where we can make exceptions if needed and what constitutes an exception? And some of those situations that come up like lay payments, reconnect fees, are there specific written, what I'll call job aids to help explain to the customer how a certain process or fee works to make it easier for the representative to explain that? Let me just switch over to another area for a minute. For instance, one of the questions that comes up for a lot of organizations right now, those of you on the call, is why do I need a landline? That's an issue you're facing. But what happens in my experience is most organizations don't have what I'll call a clear way to explain that to help the customer understand the why behind it. So what happens is customer gets aggravated, representative doesn't know how to actually deal and explain in a more succinct way. Look at some of those fees to see, does our team really understand? Can we explain it really clearly to help in diffusing what might be the start of an emotional interaction? So last question, because I am curious on this myself. Question is, does the company have clearly defined standards on when to offer extensions of payment for services? Give me a yes or no if you would, please. Just curious. Okay. And the poll says it's almost 50-50. 48% of you do, 52% of you don't. If you want to make it easier for your people that are dealing with some of those more emotional customer situations, that would be one I would recommend, is clearly set up some job aids and helping them in those kinds of situations. Do customers that interact at your organization, do they ever stretch the truth when they want something their way? And the answer is, you bet. One of the simplest things that can help you in dealing with customers that may be stretching the truth, because naturally a lot of those customers, they want things their way, is, are you as an organization, are you documenting those conversations you had? Now I know from all of the organizations I visit, because in many of those organizations I spend a day interacting with management and representatives in the company. So that gives me an opportunity to sit down at a representative or a couple representatives' desks and just kind of have a conversation with them and watch them take calls. And here's what I noticed. In most of those interactions, whether it's a payment issue, a promise to pay, or something of significance, there was no documentation done on that interaction. Why is documentation important? Is because your professionals, if they didn't get the answer they wanted from the first person, they're going to call back and ask to talk to another person to negotiate that payment, that extension. If there are clear, defined notes in regards to that previous interaction, it makes it really easy to reduce that conflict or confrontation. And abusive customers. Now I would get to listen to a lot of phone calls, and I can tell you, you have a lot of great customers that sometimes are just a little frustrated. And then you have some of those customers that those four-letter words just roll out of their mouth as their main vocabulary when they get upset. Remember, when our customers are emotional, they are not rational individuals. And naturally, you have to deal with some of those customers. Now, important, even in dealing with emotional customers that have gone from what we'll call frustrated, angry, upset to four-letter words or threatening in some form or fashion, the key part is this: that voice inflection is critical because they are in an escalated state. Raising voice just continues to increase that situation. But different from a normal emotional conversation, these are conversations where, using a calm voice, I need to immediately take control of that situation. I am going to use the customer's name. I am going to let them know that I want to help them. But if they are going to continue using that kind of language in a conversation, then I am going to bring this call to a close. So once I've stated that, see where they are with me. If I simply say, okay, great, tell me a little bit more about your situation, and they shift so that they're explaining a little more in detail, then I am going to go with them. If they go back to those four-letter words, the conversation is over. So when you've gone past just angry, so those of you on the call, you can't go to your management team and say, Dave said if they're frustrated or angry, we can hang up on them. It only relates to what we will call truly abusive situations in those calls. Now, working with emotional customers is a learned skill. Those of you that have call recording software in place at your organizations right now on this call, I'm hoping that you are using that right now to share those emotional customer calls with your team. Review the call with the employee. You may have heard a conversation, or in just rolling through calls, you've listened to a couple where the individual, the situation escalated. Or, you know, I'm in my office and I hear a voice raised. Review those calls with a representative. Ask them, based on, as they listen to that call again, what they could have done to improve the conversation. It'll create a more effective and quicker improvement when they can hear what did and didn't happen. Now, to those of you who have no call recording software, the next best thing is role play. Do people like it? The answer is no, they don't. But right now, if you're going to help people deal with emotionally frustrated customers, they need to be able to practice some of those skills in a safe environment. So setting up some of those scenarios, working through the words to use, the questions to ask, take some of those real situations and create practices around them so that they become more competent in those emotional issues. And naturally, when they're more competent, they'll be able to handle those emotional customers more consistently. So based on what I've covered, we are at the end of our time, and so if you have any specific questions right now, open that little question box down there on the right-hand side, type in whatever questions, thoughts you have, and I will take a moment to answer any of those that come up for you. Give you 20 seconds to post those questions in. Okay, one of the questions that was sent to me before is, oh, wait, let me address the one that just came to me. Bear with me 1 second. I'm going to open it on screen here. You will be able to get a copy of the presentation to Crystal. And let's see what else, if anything. Okay, one question that was given to me before the session started. Dave, I have an individual, every time the conversation with a customer starts to become a little emotional, she just escalates immediately. She becomes defensive. We've had numerous conversations about this, but for her, it happens a lot when there's, especially on disconnect, cutoff. My answer to that question is, if you have call recording in place, there's the situation of taking a couple of those calls and breaking those calls down, reviewing that call with her. Where did her voice inflection changed? Did she notice how that escalated the customer situation? The customer voice tone raised, they got defensive. Break it down in small, make use of it. If you do not have call recording software, then role play that situation with her. Put her in the role of the customer. You be the representative, and kind of just practice how to change some of those questions around so that she can experience it firsthand and then be able to practice that more in her interactions. Okay. Any other questions? Then I thank all of you for your participation today. Go out and have a great rest of the week.